Welcome to the Assistant Lab podcast, hosted by Victoria Ratton and Arnell Martin.
This podcast is dedicated to the executive assistant profession, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
We've created this podcast for the outliers, the linchpins, the assistants who are serious about their careers. This is a podcast for those who are preparing for the future today.
This is a space for no-nonsense content, benchmarking and tracking industry and world trends, as well as interesting interviews with exceptionally inspirational people. The goal here is to stimulate new ways of thinking and being in this profession.
So, on with the show.
Welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab. We've got a really super inspiring, super motivating and high energy guest for you today, and that is the incredible Mr. Daniel Skermer. Daniel has been making waves across the assistant industry when he started up the West Midlands PA Forum with a local committee of committed assistants in that region. They've gone on to achieve exceptional things with the network and have caught the attention nationally time and time again. As with all our guests, though, we like to take them back to when they were like 16 years old to find out what the actual journey was, because for many of us, it's never that straightforward. Daniel has grafted. He has been unapologetic and unafraid to change course and direction if he needed to. He didn't settle for second best for too long in any of his roles, and he's just somebody who's always up for a new challenge, which really resonates with me and my career background. So we go back into that in a lot of detail. We talk about how he set up the West Midlands PA Forum, and we talk about, you know, all the great things about PA networks, but also some of the challenges as well, because although it looks all fanciful to assistants on the outset, there's a lot of hard work, cost and backbreaking work that goes on behind the scenes, and gratefully Daniel shares some of that with you, because I think it's important that assistants do understand a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes with these networks. An incredible figure. I think you're going to leave this episode super inspired, maybe a little bit emotional like I was, but definitely motivated. 100% enjoy this. So good afternoon and welcome to the Assistant Lab. It's amazing to have you on with me today, Daniel. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks for having me, Vic. Excited. I've been looking forward to this. What a way to kick off the week, eh?
I know, and very well needed for me, I can tell you. But obviously, for anybody that's watching or listening, Arnell Martin is on a well-deserved holiday. So it is just me again. Hopefully that will be enough for you, Daniel, for the next hour.
Hope you have a good time, Arnell.
I know, she deserves it. I think, well, we've talked about her move a lot over the last few episodes, and I've always said move. Well, I did the move nearly 2 years ago now, and I've always found moving in the UK super stressful. Like whether you're renting or buying, it's just an absolute headache. So for other people in other countries,
Absolutely. No, I've seen some of her posts on Facebook, and when she's been updating. I mean, she does so much, doesn't she? So now I hope she enjoys her time off for sure.
Yeah, in that lovely sun. I think it's about 31 degrees there at the moment, she was saying to me. I know. And we're doing horrible weather here. I'm so over it.
Oh,
but it's amazing to have you here. And I know we've known each other for a little while now, but obviously we've got people listening into this podcast from all over the world. And as I mentioned to you before, like places, organisations we just didn't think would be listening. And we always love, and I know you don't come from a PA background, and we'll get into all of that and how you've ended up to where you are now, but we always love to take people back to when they were sort of 16 years old, and especially in the UK, because that's 16's a big kind of point for us, isn't it, in the education system? We've just done our GCSEs or CSEs as they were back in the day, and it's then whether do I go to sixth form, do I go to college, do I do my A levels to go to like prep for uni? What happened to 16-year-old Dan? What were you doing?
Well, I follow a lot of the stuff that you do, Vic, in the association. I love it. I think it's great, and the things that you champion, I think, are awesome, because they're the conversations that have to happen rather than the must-like conversations, which I think is great. And I was I was going to talk a little bit more just before I was 16, purely because I saw your post about your dad, and I was really, I hope you don't mind me saying, but
No, of
it
course not. Love
really
talking about
made
him.
me, yeah, it really made me think, actually. And so in school, I was really quiet. I was really, I spent a lot of time, learning things. Didn't really have a very big group of friends. I never had any male friends. I always had girlfriends, which is great. And I was straight A's up until about year 9. So I'd probably be about 14 at this point. And then there was a guy in our year who came out as gay in school, and I knew I was, but I didn't want to say anything. And I was like, I couldn't believe that he'd done that. And I saw the way that people treated him, and it was awful. And I would very much get the same, I would very much get the same thing. So because he'd come out, he was getting a lot of the brunt of it. But I would go into the changing rooms, for example, and the abuse that you would get going in there, from the lads saying things to us. But it kind of made me rebel a lot when I was at school, and so I ended up being quite naughty and trying to rebel against all these people, and I actually didn't do very well towards the end of school. So I came away with a few GCSEs, but I'm a very practical person, so I love practical learning. My first job was in a hair salon, sweeping up hair and trying to attempt to do blow dries and hair colorings, and I loved that. And then I went on to my dad. My dad had a business, which is a taxi company. When I was little, I didn't really see my dad very much because he would always go out to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he'd come back in at 6 o'clock in the morning. And at that time, I would get up, go to school, and then by the time he'd gone back out to work again, I'd come back home. But me and my sister worked there. It was really on a Saturday night. We could sit there drinking a vodka and Jack Daniels. You could smoke while you're answering the telephone to people in the call centre. It was like streetcars from Coronation Street. But my dad had built up this really fantastic, he had 250 taxi drivers in Birmingham, and he built up this really great business. But there was a lot of pressure for me to work there. And I worked there for really from the age of 15, probably till about 18. And working with your family is really hard. Because if you did something wrong, the way you would be spoken to would be very different to how somebody that was officially employed by the organisation. And so me and my sister would get quite a brunt of things. My sister actually worked her way up to be his PA, and she was his PA for 5 years. But I didn't want to be part of the business, and I could feel that there was this pressure coming on me that my dad wanted me to have some sort of major involvement in the business. It's a family business. So I went on holiday to Turkey when I was 18, and it was the first place that I'd ever felt free. I actually came out while I was in Turkey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's actually quite annoying when you come out to people and they just go, I know. Because you build up a lot of courage to come out. And actually when people go, I already knew that, you think, oh, okay. But I actually came out to my best friend when we were in Turkey. And do you know what? I felt so free. I just felt amazing. And I had the best 2-week holiday of my life. I ended up falling in love with somebody very quickly. And then I didn't want to come home. So I literally, we got to the airport and I said to my friend, I'm not going to come home. And she said, what do you mean? She was like, your mom and dad will go mad. She was like, you have to come home. I was like, I'm not going home. No, I'm going to stay here. She was like, well, what would you do? So I said to the people, the cabin crew, was like, can I take my bag off the plane? Obviously, that is just not, it's just not something that you say. You get into a lot of trouble for doing that. So I insisted that I wanted to go. So they took my bag off the hold, came back out into the airport. And I thought to myself, I'm just going to head back to Marmaris and just see what happens. So it was late at night, got in a taxi, headed back to Marmaris, didn't really know where to go. I ended up sleeping on the restaurant floor for the night on my suitcase, just until the next day came up. It was only a few hours. And I got kicked out of that restaurant by security when it woke up, when it first thing. And I started trawling the streets of Turkey thinking, right, I'm going to go to every single holiday office that there is here. So Thompson, First Choice, Thomas Kirk, all of them. I'm just going to go and see them. So it was the middle of the high season. They had no work available. And I thought to myself, what have I done? Like, I've got no money. I've got nowhere to stay. I just thought that I could just do this impulse thing. And I started to panic. I got really upset. I didn't know what to do. And I went to Cosmos and they had nothing. And I came out and there was a sign on the office door opposite which said, looking for entertainers, male singers. Well, you can probably tell by the tone of my voice that I can't sing. Absolutely awful. So I waltzed into this office and it was a British owned company. So there was a lady from Scotland, Gillian, and there was a lovely lady from near Luton called Jessica. And I was like, please, can you help me? I've got nowhere to go. I don't know what I can do. And they said, look, well, do you want to come and stay at mine tonight? Jess said she had this massive house and she had 2 kids and she was married to this Turkish guy who was at Viral, who was lovely. And she said, come and stay with us tonight as a family. We'll look after you. So I was like, okay. So I went back to her house and she was looking at the time, she was looking for an au pair for her children. And she didn't have anyone that she knew of or really trusted, and they were mostly all Turkish people, native Turkish people that would look after them, but because the children were English speaking, they couldn't really understand a lot of the Turkish at the time. So she was like, oh my God, would you consider coming? I mean, that's a big, that was back then. So
yeah.
So I lived in with them. I was cooking, cleaning, looking after the kids, taking them to school, bringing them back again, and I loved it. It was great. And then one day I had my headphones on, I was dancing in the kitchen, and I used to do jazz when I was at school. And she said, can you dance? I was like, yeah, well, I like to think I can. I had lessons when I was a kid. And she said, if I give you a track, can you put a dance together for this song? So I did, and I put a dance together for a song. I did an audition for her in a house, and she said, actually, I'd love you to go and work in our show teams in the hotels. So I started to work in the show teams doing I started off doing dancing, and I started off doing sketch shows, started off hosting. I was a bingo caller at one time. Yeah, and I was that kind of the holiday entertainer that people would know when they come on holiday. Either you were classed as a total annoyance. I think if people could have had noise cancelling headphones at that time of life, they would have probably been very popular. Or you were somebody that people were really drawn to, and you know, helped make their holiday to be something really memorable.
And to be fair, your average Brit, and not all Brits drink nowadays, but your average Brit going to Turkey, Spain, or, you know, the Canary Islands or whatever it is, after we've had a few beers or a couple of glasses of wine, like, most people sound like a good singer and entertainment is good.
Yeah, I think
you probably surpassed expectations, like even more than that.
I think the thing is like what the reason I was going back to kind of what my dad's company was is I remember the way he reacted to me. 2 days in, he rang me and he went absolutely mad. Because obviously he was expecting me back at work, and he was like, you'll be back in 3 days. And I said, that's the worst thing you could have said to me, because I won't be back, and I didn't go back for 3 years. And I lived there in the winter. There was nothing going on. I just lived there and I loved it. But it gave me the determination that I need, and it was tough. Like, I was living in a shared house with 5 different people. We could barely afford the rent. There was not enough, like, we didn't have enough money for food. We were paid £350 a month. That's how much we got paid. And we were on a Turkish salary, not a British salary. And it was hard. It was hard. And the reason I came back to the UK was because they went into administration. Unfortunately, I was gutted, absolutely gutted. It was my dream job. I loved it. And then I started my life as a receptionist in a hotel then. So it was a really posh 12-bedroom hotel. I remember Ray Winston came in once, and I was like, I know, I thought
Love a bit of Ray.
I know, I love him. He was brilliant. He came in and checked in at reception. I was like, oh my God, it's Ray Winston. And it was really, really lovely. I had a great experience working as a receptionist. And then I got promoted as a wedding coordinator. I did 3 years worth of weddings, so 268 weddings in 3 years. And the reason I stopped doing that was because I remember one day a lady, she was really excited about this particular chocolate fountain. And I just thought to myself, I'm not really excited. And this is going to be the most special day of her life to her. I should be sitting here being really excited for her and making her feel really special. And I thought the energy's gone, and I thought to myself, I need to do something about it. So I was about to hand in my notice, and the same-sex law got passed for civil partnerships at the time. Well, the pink news and everyone was saying this is going to be the pink pound. It's going to be big business for hotels and etc. So my boss was like, "Oh, I would like to offer you a promotion. You're going to be our first same-sex wedding coordinator." And actually, we had quite a few couples coming through the door. But yeah, I heard wind that Thomas Cook were recruiting overseas. So I was like, "Oh, I'd love to go back abroad again and work for an international company." So I went for the interview, and it was like really tough in assessment days. You know, you have to do a scenario where someone's having a go at you because they've been on a boat trip and you promised them that you'll see dolphins and they haven't seen it, or someone's kicking off because it's advertising the brochure, it's on average 24 degrees, but it's 22 and they're not happy about it. It's crazy. And I got the job and I got flown out to Egypt in my first year. It was literally dropped in one of the biggest hotels that they had in the program. The hotel had 27 different restaurants within the hotel. It was massive.
Where was that in Egypt? Sharm el Sheikh?
Sharm el Sheikh, yeah.
I've been there a couple of times, yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely awesome. It was the most magnificent place I've ever been to, because while I was there, I went to Israel, I went to Jordan, I went to Cairo, I went to Luxor, and it was amazing. It was the best.
Do you know, I've had a fascination with Egypt since I was a little girl. Like, I don't know, like I just started reading it. One of the few things I was good at school was history, but I loved that whole Egyptian period, and I begged to get my nan and granddad for a hieroglyphic set, because I learned all the hieroglyphics. I don't know any of it now. I'm too old now, but back then they brought me this print hieroglyphic so I could do. It was a stamp thing, so I opened it up and it had a book. And then, I could print it on paper so I could start to do hieroglyphics and understand. I just had this fascination. Now, I know it's a bit of a joke in the PA industry. I used to get called Cleopatra a lot because of my hair.
Did you?
Yeah, when I was on the speaking circuit in a big way, everybody used to say, "You look Egyptian," or "Cleopatra."
Oh, wow.
Me, like, I always had this obsession. I used to go and my dad used to take me to the British Museum a lot, and there was big Egyptian collections then in London, and my fascination I never grew out of. So I went to Sharm el Sheikh. I've been to Sharm el Sheikh a couple of times, and my husband and I did the Luxor Nile cruise, and we paid for any extras that we could get. Like, we did the Valley of the Kings, we did is it Abu Simbel, all the temples. Like, literally, I didn't see Jordan or Israel. If we'd have been there longer, we would have done some connecting flights. And
honestly, it's like, to go around the Sinai is a great place to base yourself and then go out, but obviously it was really challenging most recently because Sharm el Sheikh has been closed outside tourists, but now it's reopened, which is fantastic. But what you see, to see the culture and to see, I mean, when I went to the pyramids for the first time, I was like, how on earth did anybody build this? Like,
I know
they are just vast, and it's how preserved everything is, and you just look at a different way of life and you think, God, I just can't imagine how that would, you gets your imagination going big time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember after the Luxor cruise, like, Ma and I were kind of the youngest couple by quite a stretch, but we got on really, really well with all the other couples on the boat. But they'd all booked a second week to go to Sharm to relax, because when you do that side of Egypt, it's so tiring because it's sensory overload. You're getting all this history, new things were being dug up whilst we were there. You know, it is like massive, and at the end of the holiday we felt like we were exhausted, but in a really good way. But everyone else, we were getting the coach back to the airport to come back to London, and they were all going down to Sharm to sit on the beach for a week.
I know, we used to remember all the people that would come in from the Nile cruises as well. So yeah, but it was spectacular, you know. It was tough. It was working in the summer in boiling hot temperatures in the desert, and you know, we'd have a lot of illness to deal with. We'd have a lot of, you know, different incidents that had happened. But generally, we had, you know, great time. People are happy they're on holiday, which is great. And then I carried on working. I worked in Gran Canaria. I worked in Turkey. I did 10 summers in Turkey altogether. Yeah. So I've worked in all the holiday resorts all over Turkey. I've worked in Portugal. I've worked in Cyprus. I've worked in Tenerife. And as I was going through my career, so I loved working just kind of like, I had my hotel, I had me in the hotel, loved it. But when you're thrown into a situation where you're put with people at the beginning of a season that are away from home, and I found that a lot of the people you work with were away from home for a reason, and you tend to find that people ultimately, if you go down into kind of what the deepness of it, everyone was kind of running away from something in a way, but they were the best kind of people because it would mean that we would really love, but you would get some people that would come and they'd be absolutely homesick within 3 weeks, and that, you know, people would want to have the home comforts and go home and see their families. So I worked my way up through the management system. So I was a team leader, then I was a team manager, and then there was a destination manager. So you can basically, the destination manager looks after the airport and all of the hotels that work within it. But what I found as I went through my career is it just sucked the life out of me, because the more you go up within a company like that, like it was just a horrible. Like I would be in the police station with translators helping people that have been arrested. You would be in a hospital with people that have been ill. Any death in the resort you would have to deal with. I remember New Year's Eve. I find it really hard to forget about it, really, but New Year's Eve, when I was working in Tunisia, I had a client, one of our guests had died, and I just dealt with that death, and I went back to go, and all my reps had been out for New Year's Eve. I got back home at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and at 7 a.m. I got a phone call to say there was another death that I needed to go and deal with. And I don't think I've realised sometimes how much impact that had on me, because I was never trained to deal with those sorts of situations. Something happens overseas, you go into emergency action mode, you've got to deal with it. I've had, you know, people falling off balconies, climbing, you know, people with really bad burns in restaurants. Like it got really intense, and for my, like, mentally for me, I just couldn't deal with it anymore. So I came home.
I can't say I blame you. That is pretty tough to do. I mean, the thing is, when people go on holiday, it's this, you know, everyone's happy, cheery, they're fab to be away from the rainy UK and letting their hair down a bit. And then, you know, there is people like you that are working to make sure that holiday's a huge success. But with all the best will in the world, nobody can plan.
No, we worked abroad when the volcano went off in Iceland. So
I remember that.
we had to repatriate thousands. We had 5,000 guests in Cyprus, and they were in a hotel. They kept them all inclusive for 3 weeks. And the reaction from some people was awful, like really bad. We were having chairs thrown at us, threatened with violence. Like, it was just crazy. And I know people wanted to get home, but you cannot fly when there's volcanic ash around the world, like circulating around the world. If you want to try and get on a plane and fly through that, then good luck. But you know, we would try to help people as much as we can. But yeah, it just got very challenging for me. And a lot of the managers, about 75% of us, left the business around about the same time. We were going through a massive merger with our AG, the European side of the company, and there was an expectation that we needed to learn a secondary language, so we had to learn French or German, and it was impossible given the time frame that we would be given. So I just thought it's time to come home, and so I came home when I was about 30. Yeah, about 30. So I started my career all over again. So I went back.
like, what did you feel? Sorry interrupting you there, but what did you feel when you first initially got home? Because I was, we've chatted to Jill Quirk on a previous podcast, and obviously she worked for the Ministry of Defence. She wasn't a holiday rep, but her career took her around different. She'd come back for a short time and go back out again, and she's worked around the world. Often, sometimes, despite the fact that you might love being British, it still can be quite hard mentally to suddenly come back. And I don't know what time of year you came back, but it was probably raining. But how did you feel like that? And realising that part of your working life is over now, and
It
stuck
was
from scratch.
the biggest drop to earth like ever, because you came back to the UK. I moved back in with my mom. I only probably had about 2 friends that kept in touch with me. Like, I had nowhere to live. I had no job. I was like, I was applying for jobs, and even though how senior I was, like in Thomas Cook, we oversee destination managers is the most senior position you can get to unless you're a regional manager. So you're a regional manager, you look after 3 countries. So I was applying for jobs, and I was applying to jobs like at different hotels and getting knocked back. And I was going to interviews going, well, you're a holiday rep, all you did was drink and get really drunk over there. And I was like, is that the perception that you have of the job? Let me explain the things that we did. And it was hard because I was on job seekers allowance for 9 months because I couldn't find a job, and I was literally sat on my computer 9 till 3 every day applying for jobs. I think I went to about 56 interviews and got knocked back for them all. And then I remember I went to this, I wanted to get back into hospitality because that's where my heart is. I remember I went to this one interview, and they basically kept saying to me, well, you've been out of the country for too long, you've got no contacts, you don't know anybody. And I was like, well, no, I don't. But I thought so. The last interview, I'm going to say that I know everybody at HSBC. I'm just going to throw that in and just see what happens. I got the job straight away. And I thought they hired me because they thought that I had contacts into HSBC, which I thought was really unusual. I didn't, and I had to very quickly recover from that. But I thought to myself, like, is that substance? That's the only thing that you're not really bothered about me, the qualities that I can bring to the job, what my potential is, or what we could do together. You just want to know who I know and whether I can introduce them to you. And I just thought, oh, but I had to find a job. So I worked there doing a sales and marketing manager's maternity cover. And I remember she left me a 365-day Bible on my desk, and it was a daily list of what to do every day throughout that 365. And I got to day 3 and I just put it in the bin. I was like, I can't. I appreciate she wants to come back and it's going to be all how she wants it, but I just need to put that in the bin. But I focused everything into that career. I focused everything into getting myself back out there again. But the time, I had to take a lot of time to build those friendships back up. You go out of touch with people. You don't know a lot of my friends had children or they got married while I'd been away. It's almost like you're paused in time and you've left the country and you've been out for such a long time. You come back and everyone's moved on, but you haven't. And so it's difficult. And then because I was living with my mom, that really affected my relationship with her. So I had to move out. And I got my own place then, which is great once I got my job. So I was doing that. And then I left. That was a family business, and it was awful because the brother and sister and the mom and dad would argue. And I used to sit next to the MD, who was the brother. And the arguments they would have in the office, I think if anyone's watching, they work for a family business. But I understand what it's like. But if there's a moment and they're not agreeing with each other, there's no boundaries, and I think that's sometimes quite difficult to deal with. But I struggled at that job as well. I struggled a lot to try and integrate with the team again. And a job came up in Birmingham, and I was like, oh God, I've never worked in a city before. This will be great. Let's give it a try. So I went to go and work at Park Regis, and I absolutely loved it. It was a brand new hotel in the middle of the city. And I was a sales manager there. It was a pre-opening, so people could just see it being built in Birmingham. And obviously, a lot of PAs and event managers out of interest were like, oh, when's that opening? What's it going to be? Can I come and see it? Will my boss be able to stay there? And so we were being approached by so many different PAs anyway that I was just saying, look, I can't invite you in, but I can come and see you. So why don't we spend some time getting to know each other? So I went to go and see Jackie Goodfellow from PwC. I think she'd been there for 37 years. Absolutely love her. She's awesome. And we just sat in PwC's reception for about an hour and a half, just having a chat. And she was just talking to me about, oh, but I've had one of those days, or this has happened. And I was listening to her and I was so engaged with what she was saying. And I thought to myself, like, Jackie, I'd love to spend some more time with you. I said, when you're ready, come in, let's have some lunch together and we'll just, get to know each other. And then I went to Pinsent Masons and I had the same conversation with a lady there called Anne James. And I thought to myself, I could really feel this synergy, like so personal, really easy to talk to, wasn't coming down and literally like blaming the entire world for everything, but it was really interesting conversations that I thought to myself, it doesn't feel like there's kind of, it's being recognised really by the organisation necessarily. And I thought to myself, I wonder if all these people are having conversations with each other. So I would say to Anne James, do you know Jackie Goodfellow that works at PwC? I've never met her before. Oh, well, I've just invited her in for lunch. Why don't you come and join me as well? And then bringing them together, I mean, I didn't even have to say anything, Vic. The conversation was awesome. It was brilliant to hear how they were all talking about all these. And I sat there and I thought, what is in Birmingham for us? We were supposed to be the second city, or obviously Manchester, I know. But,
Well, I think it's financial and legal outside of London, isn't it? First Leeds, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay.
They tend to measure things by the financial and legal professions, and it's Leeds, then Birmingham, or Birmingham might have overtaken now. But,
we were just really shocked that as such a big city, there really wasn't anything. There was something called, I Googled it, and it was called the Gatekeepers Guild. And I think everyone was nearly a little bit, oh God, that's a bit antiquated, that name. And that the last event they had was in 2014. So I said to the ladies, look, I've got this amazing hotel. I know that our GM will give you whatever you want. Let's do something together. And so we said, I said, if we did something, what would we call it? And we'll call it the Birmingham PA Forum. And that's how it all started, really.
And obviously, I know I don't look old enough at 40, but I did my first PA networking event when I was 20 in London. And obviously I've travelled up and down the UK more times than people have had hot dinners over the last 2 decades. But I remember going to a couple of events in Birmingham, and these were 2 different people trying to get things off the ground in Brum, and it just never, there would be enthusiasm at that event, it just never got anywhere beyond that. And we always found it really bizarre because you'd see PAs networking like across the UK, in Edinburgh, Glasgow, London. I mean, London's a bit of a given anyway, but Birmingham was always sort of the odd one out until you came along with that Birmingham PA Forum, because they, despite the attempts, nothing just ever got off the ground. And I don't know, mate, it was all clearly just about timing and having the right person.
Well, I think Tracy Payton, so she's the regional chair for IMA. And, she said it to me. So I said to her, I was like, well, why don't you come and join us and come and work with us? And let's, if that benefits IMA in some way, then great. But if she said the same thing, she said she was really struggling to get the events off the ground in Birmingham. But I thought to myself, I know I just need to really focus on it. And if I can give it the focus that it needs, then, and I can get input from the people that it's most important for me to get the input from, the community that are coming, I can drive this forward and I can make it happen. And that's why I think it's really important to be based in the region. So years ago, from a particular training company, I got offered a lot of money to franchise PA Forum around the country. And I was like, no. And the reason I didn't do that was because how could I push a network, for example, in Newcastle, the only reason PA Forum works in Birmingham was because I knew the people that I was talking to. And you start off with that, when you've got something like that's why I love seeing all the stuff that you're doing, Vic, because the national associations to me and the institutions in any profession that I work with are my go-tos. Like, so I always make sure that I try and get involved in whatever I can. I always try and make sure I find out what's happening with the association, what the day-to-day updates are, because they have such a nationwide understanding, whereas I'm in a region and I just want to try and build that region up. And it's hard work. I love it. It is hard work. But the response that we've had over the 7 years that we've been going now has just been crazy.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. Now, I understand with IMA, because it used to be called UMA when I was involved with it, and then before that EQPS, I think it was called, and it did have a good presence in Birmingham, but this predates the 20 years that I've been involved in the industry. I mean, I guess things change over time, and you have a dynamic leader in that area, and they might retire out, or life changes, something, a life event. I've seen a lot of that over the years, but it's amazing to see that. But I kind of get what you're saying, because even with EPA, it was suggested that a global thing needed to be set up for PAs, and I was always against that, and I still am, because I've trained PAs around the world. The cultures are so fundamentally different in some areas. Like, there's still countries that women are not even allowed to have the job title executive assistant. So like you were saying, for you to run something up in Newcastle and not actually be there on the ground, I felt that from a global perspective. So I've spent the last 20 years traveling up and down the UK, and as a national association, I only need to know a little bit about each region. I don't need the intricate ins and outs of what's going on. And I look at job stats, redundancies, and stuff that the networks don't have to look at, and so the dynamic is completely different. And like you say as well, I have to go out there and say things and run campaigns that are not always popular with people, because I'm doing it at a national level. And so
exactly, and that's the thing, associations challenge. I was on the committee for the HBAA, which is the Hotel and Bookings Agencies Association, and I was on that committee for a number of years. But I did it because I really gave me an understanding of what was happening out there at the moment. But I was still based in Birmingham, I still had and I think the pandemic kind of, we identified when we first started the forum that we wanted to create something that was all around our values, which was to provide educational, inspirational and aspirational content that helps with the learning of executive and business support professionals, but also celebrates them. Now, that's not a sort of slogan. It's not a very good one anyway, because it's quite long, but we wanted to make sure that we lived by the values that we do. So we would do an inspirational event, an aspirational event, and an educational event. So we'd have a speaker I remember we had a lady called Jane Weaver, and she was a PA at a logistics company in Birmingham. She ended up buying that company and turning it into a multi-million-pound business. And now she's a business coach. She's fantastic. She's got great, she went down really well with our members. And it was about inviting people to have those, to keep those aspirations going, give them content about educational pieces that would help and support them through their roles, or challenge the mindset and think, oh, I'm being challenged a little bit outside of what I feel comfortable with here. I wonder how that will work. And networking is part of that. And the people have built up some fantastic connections with them. But networking within the role, seeing people coming together to an event to network has been fascinating for me to see over 7 years, how relationships have built through that. And I think that's where you get an appreciation of it, because absolutely the first event that we went to, seeing PAs walk into, I called it Noah's Ark. So they all walked in twos, and it was deathly silent. It was so quiet, it was really uncomfortable. And I'm not everyone's cup of tea. And if you've got Tigger bouncing towards you at an event, and come on, ladies, you okay? Let me introduce you to so and so, and it can be quite overwhelming for some people. But once they got talking to each other, the fantastic thing about networking within this our profession is that the one thing that people have automatically got on in common is the job role that they do. And you can talk about that for days. You always have people say, oh, can I ask you this? Or has this happened to you today? Or, oh, have you been to this, or have you seen that event, or have you, it's all that sharing. We're such a shared community, which I think is great.
You just though you have just made me laugh. And when I set up my first PA networking event 20 years ago, obviously I'm 2021, I'm a pesky snowflake millennial, and I had, like you had people walking in twos, I had an audience of hardened London PA networkers who were uber confident, knew their stuff, worked mostly at really high levels. And then you've got somebody who's just stepped into a really senior EA to CEO role, and that was pretty unheard of back then. There wasn't that many people who'd got senior that young, but a lot of people know my career story. But I get up in front of an audience, but it's quiet for different reasons. So the quietness was, who the hell does she think she is? Because then they started heckling me. And it was kind of like, well, who do you think you are? And stood up like this. And I remember saying, look, I'm not saying I know everything. I definitely don't. Like, you people could spin plates around around my head. But I do need to learn. And there is no network here at the moment. A lot of the networks back then, Dan, were very elitist. So if you didn't work for a well-known celebrity or like a high-profile business person, you often weren't allowed membership. Like, I was turned down membership for a PA network in London, and which looked like, my boss had suggested to go for it, but they said she wasn't high-profile enough. And so they were judging me off the back of who I worked for, and yet she had changed the lives. Her work still continues to change the lives of tens of thousands of British disabled people.
Wow.
And her charity was started up with Prince Charles, or now His Majesty. But yeah. I swore to myself, after seeing that level of snobbery and elitism in London when it came to PA networking, that I wasn't prepared to put up with that, in terms of that I still felt there was a space for more networks. And I didn't have that gloss. I was rough and ready. I knew that. I had a very self-awareness that I wasn't up to that level of what was expected of PAs in London back then. I knew that.
I think there are some times I go to some events in London and I feel really out of place. Like, I can easily feel quite out of place there, because like I say, I think when you work for corporate, it's very easy to be in that corporate world for the day, and then being your authentic self is really important, and it's about letting those barriers come down slightly and letting somebody else in. And I think just seeing the transformation around, there's times when I'm at an event and I stand back and just watch, and I just look around and I think, this is brilliant. Like, what everyone's doing with each other is fantastic. And that is what, for me, I think it goes back to that experience of being in a show. Like,
you
are on stage, but you're pleasing everybody. And I think that the reason I do what I do is because, like, when you become, is it called subservient, is it, where you want people to have, like, so when we went for Thomas Cook, our slogan was drummed into us: our world revolves around you, and we go further to make dreams come true. And we would go through intense 2-week training course, and everything was about the customer, everything that you could do to make sure that they're okay and had the best holiday of their life. And it was the same when we did events, to make sure they have the best time that they can possibly have. And that comes with the good and the bad. But we would do anything, people would ask us for the most bizarre things, but we would go and do it. And I've always had that energy where I've always just wanted to do things that help other people. And networking for me, when I came back to the UK, was the most petrifying experience of my life. But I could see the value through networking. And even if it wasn't because I wasn't finding a client there, it was about, I've connected two people together, and those two people are now having a conversation, and that conversation can lead to something, whatever friendship it could lead to. a support in some way, it could lead to something. And then those two people will then talk to another person. And, you know, there are people that absolutely hate networking. There are people that don't want any involvement with networks. You know, I've been to present to a number of corporates before, and I've walked into the boardroom, and there might be 22 people in the boardroom, and the first 12 are like uber engaged, and the back of the table is like, why am I in this meeting? I'm not interested. It's not something I want to go to. It's not something I want to do. And that's fine. That's great. Like, everyone's completely different. But those 12 people in the front, like, you might change another 4 people's minds once they see some of the things that you do. And that's why I like to go into these corporate companies and go and speak to the networks, because I like them to think they have got this external support, as well as the internal support and the support of the associations, institutions, societies.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously I've worked in a big PLC FTSE company, and I became different in there. I mean, when I come out, I had to unhazify, as I say, because you've got that corporate shield, that corporate armory, and I think you can't. I mean, I always carried, it was one of the reasons Hayes hired me, because I had these fabulous books. You know, I was a very seasoned networker, and yet the Hayes PAs weren't even invited to the Hayes PA secretarial client events. Our own client events, they were never invited to, let alone going out to external networks. So it was an alien thing to a lot of people. But I've also, do you know, Dan, of late, I've also been very conscious of people who are more introverted, and I think that's come to the forefront more through the lockdowns, because they've really thrived on the virtual training with me. So the extroverts have turned off their camera and are like, and which is strange, you'd think, and then the introverts are, you know, in there engaging with me as a trainer and coach. And actually we did some focus groups with EPA last year, and there was some of the people who would identify as introverts on them, and I've really got to understand that a bit better now in terms of networking. So stop trying to force them to come out. They like the virtual stuff. They feel more comfortable doing it. And that actually there is more of a place. One of the things I used to say in my presentations, which I know we talked about before we started recording, was that you want to have a successful career, you have to network, you've got to do this, you've got to have a LinkedIn profile. I feel guilty for saying that, and I've really softened my approach on that now, because as I said to you, I know some top flight EAs, as you do, that are on LinkedIn because they have to be, but they don't use it. They're not on there all day. They're not doing the ego posturing stuff. They're not even liking posts because they're getting on with their jobs. So they've got, there's no photo. So I'm trying to, and they are part of my membership. So it's, whilst I can't be everything to everybody, since the lockdowns, I've just become a little bit more aware now of that there are people.
100%. I mean, when lockdown happened, like everybody, you know, we did stuff together, Vic, as well, and you know, the crew had a number of conferences while we were in lockdown, which were just amazingly helpful to people. And out of the back of that, we thought, you know, let's do some virtual stuff for our online community in the region. But then we did start naturally to have people that came and joined our virtual community from all over the UK in different places. And so we thought it's really important for us to carry that on out of lockdown, because we are a regional network, but we do offer a virtual program that was really appreciated and valued by those people. We don't want to say to those people, sorry, you know, we value that network. We value their, you know, what the contribution that they bring to any event, whether that be, you know, coming along to an event or writing the chat box or taking themselves off mute and saying whatever they feel comfortable with. But I also think as well, people think that I'm naturally an extrovert, but I see social media as another thing. I think we spoke about it before. I can feel like sometimes you're in a crowded room and there's just everyone shouting around you, and you don't really know what to do or what to say or what direction to go in.
Oh yeah, it's changed a lot even in the last 3 years as well. You talked about having regular breaks off it. I literally have to save my sanity nowadays. Like seriously.
And I think people say to me, why do you not, you haven't posted a photo on Instagram for like 3 years. And I'm
Are
like,
you still alive?
somebody said the PA Forum's Twitter feed hasn't had anything on it since 2020 or something. And I went, because for me, it's like, it's another form of communication, which is great, but I struggle with a lot of communication. I always have done. Emails, messages, phone calls, everything flying at me at the same time. It makes me retract. So, for example, we had our awards judging over the last 2 days. I got home on Thursday and I had to go to bed. I was in bed at 6:30, and I thought, I've not been in that environment where it's all in person, everyone's coming, and you're talking to people, you're networking with people all day, and you're making people feel comfortable and welcome. And I was exhausted, but it was so good. But at the same time, I needed that me time. I needed that shut the door and just block out the world and just have that recharge time, which I think was really important as well. I think that's something that I've learned throughout from the pandemic, is how that you time is it really important.
Yeah, and I find, do you know, talking about social media, I get it, because I literally get it from firing at all angles, and I used to really be able to cope with it quite well. Nowadays, I'm a bit like, come on, I need to focus a bit, blah, 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 and I'm trying to respond to people. And actually, we didn't like Twitter when the PA industry first started getting on social media in a big way. It was Twitter that was the big place. I mean, at some of the big PA conferences, they used to have big screens with the Twitter live feed, and everybody was encouraged to tweet. And actually, when I do PA events now, I'm like, honestly, don't feel the pressure to have to do it, because it's detracting away from the speaker. You're not really taking in what the speaker's saying, because whilst you're tweeting that sentence they've just said, they've already said another 4 or 5. I mean, Twitter, but people started to sort of fall out of love with Twitter. The algorithms were a mess. It's kind of what's happening with Facebook and Insta at the moment. And but having said that, I've started falling back in love with Twitter recently. So I do find myself, because I've not really been active with the EPA or my accounts for a few years now, on and off. I've had to, you have to go on it a certain amount of time every day, just to, and it's only a short amount of time, but just but I realise how much I miss the debates. Well, some of I do still love LinkedIn. I fall out of love with it, then I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. I still think it's a clunky feed, it's a clunky looking website. I do find some of the toxic positivity on LinkedIn quite hard to take sometimes. I do, and there's a lot of it on my feed. I don't know whether that's because it's the algorithms, but there's a lot, and sometimes I do find that a bit too much. So
it's really weird with LinkedIn, because I actually am more open and honest on LinkedIn than I am on my own Facebook page.
Well, I am sometimes, but how is that? Like,
Because, for example, if I'm feeling vulnerable, or I'm feeling not like I'm in a great place, I would channel my thoughts into a post on LinkedIn, not for attention. I'm not doing it for attention seeking, but I'm thinking, am I the only person that is thinking like this at the moment? I just need that reassurance. But with Facebook, because all my family are on there and friends,
it's
sometimes
judgment,
it can
isn't
be
it?
red flagged quite quickly, which is great because they're so caring. But actually, I don't want a solution to it. I just want to know that people can understand how I'm particularly feeling about something at the moment, and just to know that you're not on your own. And I think that's what I've used LinkedIn for sometimes, because again, it goes back to being vulnerable. It means being your true self on there. Obviously, you don't want to overshare and share too much, but sometimes you're just having one of those days and you think, is it just me, or am I just going absolutely crazy here? And you know, I let it build up sometimes to a certain place. I just think, right, I'm just going to share how I'm feeling, because I think it's really good to talk, and I think it's really good to say.
I mean, when I first got on LinkedIn, it was all uber professional, and obviously it's changed over the years. The thing is, I'm very aware. I think with me, I've had to learn how to balance stuff, and I have shared more recently than I have done in previous years. I've talked about homelessness and the fact that I have been homeless, but I've, included Crisis, who we support. That's our charity partner at EPA, and some of the work and campaigning they're doing. And what might trigger me posting that isn't that I'm necessarily not thinking about what happened to me. It's the fact that so many British people are homeless at this moment in time, and there's a campaign, And I'll talk about bits and pieces, but historically, I remember when my PA brand was starting to build, which was all organic, none of it was planned. But I remember people saying to me, when I was in that high profile campaign with my sisters with the NSPCC, and our whole story was in the national press, I remember somebody in the PA industry, who I won't name, saying to me, this is going to absolutely trash your brand. Like, you cannot trade off your victimhood. And I think, like, you know, I've got that balance with, I want to support that charity because of what happened to me and my sisters, or I want to support that charity because of what happened to me in my teens. Yeah. But I also have been really careful I never wanted to be known as, that's the girl that's been abused, that's the girl that's been homeless, that's the girl that had a nervous breakdown in her teens. You know, I didn't want to trade off victimhood. So sometimes it is about finding that back. Some people are happy doing that and trading off it on LinkedIn. They make money off the back of it, and that's fine. Honestly, however people deal with what's happened in their past.
I think this is why I like this, like, you know, what I've loved, and I think I've noticed it more since the pandemic, is that people are being more open about things that have happened to them in their lives, like, and talking about things that are quite difficult to talk about, but important, because people need to be able to relate to you. And we were talking about this before we came on the call. People relate to everybody in very, very different ways. The reason I was talking to you when I first came on about being bullied at school and being gay and having, you know, I felt when I went to Turkey, I was more free over there not to be judged than I was in the UK. Like, because I'd been bullied so much. When I went to Turkey, no one batted an eyelid. I was having a great time. It was brilliant. You know, in what is a typically Muslim country, where, you know, I was very gay. If, you know, walking down the street, I went like literally to the extreme. I never had a single bad word that I've heard, or I never was threatened. I never, you know, felt unsafe at any time. I felt horrifically unsafe when I was in the UK because of the bullying that I'd had here.
And it still was a very, very homophobic country back then. I mean, dare I say it, and I think I can, as the daughter of a gay man, I'm seeing some of it spike back up again in recent years, and it's really sad. I mean, my dad's safe space was London, actually, because he could just be out and loud and proud, and nobody, you know, in those what they called back then the gay areas of London, which he used to take me clubbing with him quite a lot. And there was Cardiff was another safe like city for him, but I get what you're saying, that dynamic of just being able to be yourself. And
exactly. And I think we get you know, through the networking and through people really understanding and supporting each other, is that it's these chances to tell people stories, to share their stories. And even if you are the introverted person who's on mute and just want to come and listen, thank you for coming. You know what I mean? Thank you for your contribution, because everybody makes a contribution any way, but if that's made a difference, that person's, you know, day, week, month, year, or whatever, it's great. And I think that's why this is so important. So, you know, for me, the working over Birmingham in the past 7 years has been like crazy. It's a world that I lost my job in the pandemic. I did think that, you know, could I run the PA Forum full time? Well, no, because, you know, I thought to myself, would we be the new Birmingham Chamber of Commerce for PAs, or, you know, that people would pay a membership fee and kind of I would be able to support myself from it. But I think we have too many challenges that we need to face in terms of charging is great, because obviously we need to be able to cover our resources and what we do. But there is still so much work to do with the businesses, some of the businesses that are engaged. Like, I'm just talking to a legal firm now. It's just taken me 7 years. And suddenly it's like the floodgates have opened, but I've been in, I've presented to the teams, I've spoken to them, but the amount of time it's taken just to just get them to change their mindset about investing in their communities is so time consuming. I love it when a company just comes and goes, oh, we'd love to be able to sign up this many people and that's great, but I'm doing it now to challenge the companies that aren't doing it. And so to kind of help with diversity and kind of the feeling of inclusion, we've organised a dinner with the president of the Law Society at the moment, and we've invited the business support managers from each of those different law firms in Birmingham, small and large, to talk about. We want to hear from the Law Society about how PAs and executive assistants, secretaries, office juniors can get involved in the things that the Law Society and see those faces going to the events that the lawyers are going to. And we would just want to challenge these things slowly but surely. I know we're doing that for the legal sector, but if that works well, then, and we've made a difference.
Yeah.
I think it's important for the president to also understand the challenges that are coming from the PAs as well within the legal sector. And that's not to trash anyone, it's not to walk all over anyone or tell anyone they're doing the wrong thing, or it's to give people the opportunity. So if we're being that connector, that's what I've always been taught, that's what I've always done. So we'll be that connector between the people that we need to get people speaking to.
Yeah, and well, that I do understand, and not being able to make a living, I do understand that. It's all for the greater good, Dan, all for the greater good.
I think,
I want to get on to talking about the awards now.
Okay.
So you launched some awards in the West Midlands initially, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How long's that been going? 4 or 5 years?
6 years now.
6 years.
Yeah.
Wow, that's gone quick. I remember
I know.
the last one. Like, wow.
Yeah. So we the pandemic, we carried on with them. So although they were virtual, we still did them. But yeah, it was 6 years, and it's the time has flown by so quickly. But historically, we always had a lot of self-nominations. So I would say 75% of the nominations that were received in year one were self-nominations.
But that was the pattern across the entire UK at the time. Yeah.
But now I would say this year, more than 75% were nominated.
Which I have to say is music to my ear, because I've been very out there and open about how peeved I've been with organisations and bosses who are literally just sitting there not getting involved, because that's not what used to happen. And so to hear that, it's magic, it's brilliant. Well done.
But it is great. Whether the nominations are longer than 2 sentences sometimes is quite questionable. And
step in the right direction. Step in the right direction.
It is. So I keep saying to them, keep the nominations coming, even if it's it's great to be nominated, but if you put my PA is amazing, well, of course they're amazing because you nominated them, but why are they so amazing, And so it's been really good. The awareness now about the awards, particularly in Birmingham, has been fantastic. But I've always followed Manchester as I love what Vanessa does with the Rising Star Awards, and I love Manchester's awards, and I haven't had a chance to go to We Are the City awards, but I would love to go. It looks fantastic.
I'll have to tag you in as my guest because I'm a judge of that this year.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with watching what people do and and taking that on board and thinking what contribution can I make to make a difference as well. You're not copying anyone, you're working with people to do it. And Amanda and the team have just been amazing, and they gave me so much mentorship and guidance on how to do it. And the challenge is not like, don't do this and do that, because they've learned from all the different mistakes that and I've got my own as well. And it was great. Sarah Howson spoke to me before she launched the BBO Awards, and I'm sure Sarah will then go on and share her experience with somebody else. And it's all about working together and supporting each other. I think it's challenging that we don't really have a national awards. I said, but again, it's
you won't be getting that from me, I'm afraid. And I'll tell you why, Dan. And I'm glad that people are going to listen, because I've had a few people email me about this. So I was involved with the national awards. There used to be 2, and the one was the Times secretarial, and it was the Hayes Times, and before that DHL Times. PA of the Year, that was the most prestigious award we've ever seen at a national level, and the reason being because of the paper it was in, and it had the creme supplement. And then we had what was Executive PA magazine back then. They were the biggest magazine in the country for PAs, and they did a national awards as well, and I've been involved with both of them extensively. But I kind of realised when so creme the Times shut the creme supplement, so those awards came to a natural end. That was during the recession. And then exec PA, the market was changing, you know, PAs didn't want to, it was again at the back end of the recession. So they did well because they carried on for a number of years after Hayes Times. And we then got involved with that. And, you know, interest started to wane in national awards, if we're being honest. Because unless national awards simply will not work unless you've got a robust media partner like The Guardian or The Times, because it's got to be a publication that's read by CEOs and directors and leadership teams. And that's not to say I couldn't go out there and ask the question, but unless it's done at that same prestigious level as what was done with the Hayes Times, and the recognition it gave, the real recognition it gave at a national level, I wouldn't do it. Anyone attempting to do it without some sort of partner like that, I'm sorry, it's just cardboard cutouts and crayons to me.
Yeah,
and
I think
national.
Yeah, I think anyone who's going to take that on is massive, and
Insane.
no, and I know what we do with our awards, and I go to Manchester every year and I see how big their awards are. We all, when I was saying earlier, I don't take any money from PA Forum. I get paid through my clients, through my business development consultancy. So I still work a full-time job and still do all this stuff at the same time. So knowing all my committee are volunteers, all of them do massively full-time jobs. They're all supporting CEOs or managing directors or, partners, etc. And they're all gifting their time as well. And the amount of work that goes into it, I mean, we love it, it's absolutely brilliant, but we get people we struggle sometimes because companies might want to go, well, I can't nominate someone for the West Midlands and I then not nominate them in London. Well,
yeah,
there are loads of awards in London. There's loads. Like,
London's got more awards than you can shake a stick at, but perhaps that is part of the problem, Dan, that it's actually diluted the scene in London because there's too many. And it's a conversation I remember having with a couple of PA industry leaders a few years ago now, when London, because London, that's what it's like there. It gets saturated with lots of awards networks, then it dies off, and then it comes back and gets saturated with something else. It's a really interesting pattern down there. But yeah, it's perhaps that's because there's too much noise sometimes in London. It can have a bit of the reverse effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's like, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking, if we hadn't done, there's not a single award ceremony in Birmingham anywhere that has a PA category. Not one.
Really?
Like, no, you will never. There is not a business support category. The Law Society Awards doesn't have them. The Chamber Awards don't have them. No, if I thought to myself, if we weren't doing this now, I'm probably making a bold statement, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm all up for challenge, but I thought to myself, if we're not doing what we're doing, who is it that would, where would our community be recognised at the moment in the West Midlands?
No, but they wouldn't, and that's the thing. Yeah,
and that's incredibly sad. And then sometimes the London ones are quite London centric, so how do you build those communities? So we've got Manchester in the north who are just literally owning it, amazing. And then you've got London here and we're packed in the middle. And we thought to myself, like, how are we going to be able to do that? And so when now we've launched in the East Midlands, which is something that we've done this year, again, it's very difficult to find anywhere that will recognise the category. It's not, so we wanted to launch in the East Midlands with the awards this year because we think it's important to champion the profession in the area. And it's very vast, it's huge area. But we've had a really good response to start with, which has been great. Interestingly, 80% of the nominations are for universities. We've probably had every university and school.
I like that.
Midlands.
That's really interesting.
It is, yeah. We've had nominations from KPMG, from Arup, DHL, etc. But
Mm.
majority of the nominations, like De Montfort University, Leicester University, Loughborough University, Nottingham University, Derby University, and the colleges, it's crazy.
So let me ask you a question, and this is not me attacking you, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here and asking.
Okay.
I'm sure some people, you've probably been asked it before anyway, so I'm not rattling cages. Why not do a Midlands PA of the Year and amalgamate the two? Why? What are the importances to people listening now, in terms of still having that East and West Midlands for those of us that don't live in the Midlands and understand the kind of setup?
Yeah, I think we started our journey in Birmingham, and then we quickly realised, people were lived out in Coventry, Warwickshire, Sutton Coldfield, Redditch, Worcester. And I thought to myself, well, let's take the events around where they are. So that's why we rebranded as West Midlands. So we run events in the different areas of the West Midlands. And then Leslie had a conversation with me, Leslie Young, who run the East Midlands PA network, had a conversation with me post-pandemic and said, Dan, you kept the network going during the pandemic, and we grew our network and the strength of our network, I think, through the pandemic, if anything, because we had the most engagement at that time. And Leslie said, I'd love to work with you to see if we can rebuild the East Midlands, because it is a very sporadic region. If you're doing events in Leicester, it's hard for people in Nottingham to come. If you're doing events in Derby, it's hard for people in Leicester to come. So geographically, locations is hard. So I said to Leslie, look, I think when we do events, the most engagement we get is out of our conference and out of our awards, because people come to those events because it's hugely positive. It's normally, celebrating people, and it's bringing in other people from the organization. So sometimes people might bring their director or one of the HR people with them to an event, and they look around and think, we had the managing director of Aldi UK. He came to a PA nominee event, and he was like, absolutely loved it. It was brilliant to see his PA with him being recognised as well, and connecting and networking with people. So because we were in our first year with East Midlands, we wanted to, if we amalgamate it too much, I mean, we've not even scratched the surface. If you think some of the biggest employers in the East Midlands, we've had no nominations from Next, Boots, all of their HQs are in the East Midlands. We haven't had any nominate. We've Travis Perkins, like a lot of the businesses based in the East Midlands, we've had no nominations for. And I do appreciate that not everybody is an awards person. Like some people absolutely hate it. We get people email us and go, thanks very much, but no thanks. And that's fine. Again, absolutely fine. You don't need to necessarily have that as reassurance that what you do is an amazing job. What I do love about it is it's about bringing the profession together and the support. So, for example, the first year that we did the West Midlands PA was what it was then Birmingham. I stood up in front of all of the CEOs and in front of everybody, and my knees were knocking, Vic. Like I've gone up and done a show before, but never to that audience. And I've delivered the speech. We did the night, which was amazing. And then 2 days afterwards, I got a call from the PA to the CFO of Tarmac, and she said to me, "Can you come in and see my chief finance officer?" I was like, why do you need me to go and see that? And she said, oh, he just really wants to speak. She was like, okay. So I went into his office and he sat there and he said, I'm part of a CFO network and we don't have anything like this at all. Tell me what I need to do. And I was like, you're calling me in to tell you, the CFO of Tarmac, what you want to do with your network? Like, that's just crazy. And I was like, I don't need you to tell anything. Because like,
yeah, and some of the network, because obviously I've seen some of the networks and memberships my CEOs and chiefs have had over the decades, and they can be a little bit staid. I just think PAs have had to, because if you walk into a room and you're a CFO, people instantly respect you because of that job title. Like EAs are still fighting. Depends where you are and what sort of room you're walking into. But if you're in a room where there's a lot of other professionals, you're not necessarily the most respected profession in that room or at that same level. And I think actually PAs have had to work harder at networking and cultivating that creativity via networks than perhaps CFOs. It's expected. I mean, if you're a mover or shaker in any UK city, you're expected to be a well-seasoned networker at a certain level.
Yeah.
It's just assumed. Well, I say expected. It's assumed that you would be.
Yeah, and I just thought to myself, you know, I said to him, I was like, I can't. It's the people that come, it's the community that's created, it's the people that are engaged and want to get involved. That's the only reason it works, is because the people who are involved want to make it work. And you know, I love the fact I've been following, you know, with all the board appointments for EPA, which is amazing. And I just think it's fantastic to have people that are going to be working with you in partnership to make EPA the best it can be, representing as many people as I can, you know, through all walks of life in across the profession. And ultimately, we're all here to do one thing, and that's to make waves in the profession. And we all do it very differently, but collectively, it's really important that we have this messaging together and we're working together to champion the profession. And I think that I would like to say positively in Birmingham, I think things are starting to change, and I can see that from the nominations for the awards. I can see that now from some of the companies that are really supporting. You know, I went into Birmingham Council the other day and I did a presentation for Birmingham Council. I've been knocking on the door for 3 years. That's been great. I'm going into Eversheds. I've got Shoesmiths. I've got, you know, and I'm doing a recording for KPMG for the Administrative Professional Day. And I think to myself, like, businesses are starting to open the doors again, and they're starting to listen. And even if they just listen and hear the stories of what the association's doing or what we're doing as a network or whatever we can do to support each other, it's starting to change the mindset. And I think that is a positive thing that we should really focus on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our work's obviously very different at EPA in a way, and we're, by God, the mountains we've got to climb at a government level and big business. But one thing I am proud about our board, that just over a quarter of them are not from a PA background, and I think that's really important now. I think, and I know you're not either, which is what I think is what adds some of the magic to that, because you're bringing in that external viewpoint, that diversity of thought and opinion. Sometimes the PA industry itself can be too insular, so we're going around, you know, we'll sit at a table and cook up all these amazing plans, but actually it's sometimes better to bring people who are not immediately and you're doing your day-to-day job.
Yeah,
bring them in. Sometimes it can have a damaging effect, but most of the time it's actually really good. So we were really surprised at how far our board application, we had a massive amount of applications, but I'm not talking about necessarily the quality, because it was all very, very good actually, but where they were coming from, like people who weren't in this industry, had nothing to do with any of the networks, didn't know a single thing, applying to be on our board. And I've had a previous HR director who I used to work very closely with. He said, I'd love to be on your board. Now I haven't, he just missed the goalpost. And I said, sorry, we've just made all these announcements. But to know that it's made that kind of impact has been really, really good. But, you know, it's been a rough few years for us as an association. We've still delivered a lot free of charge, as I've often talked about, probably gone on about a bit too much on the podcast, but
no, but I think the other thing, and I think it's important to talk about the challenges that we do have.
yeah, because
You know,
it's tough.
you know, myself and Sarah Houser, we've brought together network leaders, particularly over lockdown. And one of the commonalities that came out of that, and I'm going to say it because it is really frustrating, is people not turning up to events and cancelling. We did an event the other week. We had 120 people on at the Black Country Living Museum, and 26 people turned up. I've never been so embarrassed. Like,
Do you know what?
yeah.
This is not a surprise face, because we went through this about 5-6 years into my journey of networking. We had the same thing, Dan. And
Yeah.
frankly, when I got to Hayes, I actually had a blacklist in the end, and then on this blacklist were repeat offenders of this. I literally it's so disrespectful to
And
not
like,
even send an I'm assuming a lot. Do these people send an email, a text, WhatsApp?
so I'd say what's frustrating, since we've built this, this need and want to bring everybody back together, which we're trying to do, and we're trying to champion that. And what was really sad was the EA to the CEO of the museum, who's one of our members, really went out. We had the actors on the streets, we had food, we had different talks going on in some of the pubs, and we had, she'd really gone all out. And the reams of emails that we got kind of like 2 hours before the event, 4 hours before the event, you just know, you get to 12 o'clock and you just see it and you think, oh God, here we go. And it's really difficult. I do appreciate that people actually have genuine reasons why they can't go to an event. But when you've worked so hard to try and put that event on for free, and it doesn't cost us, it doesn't cost anyone to go, anybody to go, it's really frustrating. And that's not just coming from me, that's coming from all of the networks, because we all talked about it where we were going to do a campaign about, fighting against cancellations for events, because
We're not the only industry going through this. I will say that to you. It's happening a bit.
And so what I would just say to anybody listening is, please come, because the only reason we do it is because you want us to do it, and it's for the profession. It's not, I could have an extra night at home. It's not, I'm not getting paid to kind of put that event together. I'm not paid to go to that event. I'm not paid to, I can have an extra night at home. I want to do it because you guys want me to do it for you, and we want to put it together. And so, like a cascade effect, when one person, particularly if you get groups from business, if one person cancels or two people, and you just see that kind of cascade, and it's just like, please still come, because we've had 2 years of nothing in terms of in person, and now we're trying to go back to doing it again. So please, if you're going to book onto an event, please come.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've put this on this podcast. This has been going on for a long, long time. Now, a couple of EPA members might turn around and say, well, Vic, you've been cancelling things. I've had to do a lot of shifting with EPA's events programme, but we're not, and I'm talking about the virtual stuff. If we get trainers pull out at the last minute, or I've carried on, had to cancel some of my sessions at the last minute. If one of my team, who are all incidentally volunteers, if a crisis goes on with them, like we've had Carly's son had pneumonia recently, and then okay, fine, I'll drop what I'm doing and go into your inbox. That's how it is. But face-to-face events, it's in terms of people dropping out to this. I mean, I remember when the pattern when it was happening when I was running PA events in the city, there was a period, Dan, it was just before the recession started to kick off, and then overlapped into that. And for me, so I'd have 100 people be able to get into that room at Cheapside. I'd have to get 250 people to book tickets to get the full deck of 100 people there. And we're going back to 2007, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, it's true. You have to overbook the event.
Massively overbook to get the actual numbers you need. It's ridiculous. And what I'd say to people then, as a bit of caution advice, just don't overcommit yourself as well. And because I know a lot of my members have said, Vic, I get FOMO, I feel like I need to sign, and then I realise I've just signed up to too much. Just think very strategically about what you're signing up. Now, me personally, I would have loved to have come to that event if I was a local PA. I would have had a curiosity in the museum, how that EA works there. We don't often hear about EAs that work in that field. I think I'm glad you've put that, and it's an industry plea that will be out on this podcast far and wide, and just be as a cautionary to assistance, just be careful on what you're signing up to, I guess.
And I think that's right. And I think if you can take another thing from that, is there's nothing harm in putting together your networking plan for the month. So put together, like, what 3 things do I really want to do this month that's going to be maybe benefit you for work, but also benefit you personally. That might be an EPA event, it might be a PA Forum event, it might be to go and have a coffee with somebody somewhere, it might be to have a virtual call with somebody. Just put those kind of 3 things in your diary that you think, I'm definitely going to commit to that, obviously unless something happens and you can't go. But I would just make my plea just again, because we it's really disheartening when you see all those cancellations coming in one day. And it gets to the point where you don't know what to say to the venue. So let's please keep, if you are going to come, please come.
There we go. That's our industry message out there. So thinking about the future a bit, I mean, obviously you've touched on it quite a bit already, and there's a lot to do regionally, and I know that feeling because I feel like that nationally. And a lot's going to change in the profession over the next decade. It is, and it's not really been talked about a lot very much at the moment, but it will because of these new generations and how they operate and work, and the industry itself hasn't done nearly enough work on that. But parking that to the side and thinking about your local members, what I mean, are the challenges mostly around this perception thing, confidence?
I think diversity is important, but obviously, you know, we did we were trying to promote the profession now within schools, so that's going to be a massive focus for us. I think for the to try and let people think about why they can come into the profession. So you can go and work at Gymshark, or you can go and work at Instagram or Facebook, but you could work within the back office or supporting roles. So, and those roles are equally as important as the influencers that you see on those platforms, you know. And it's great to see when on Friday we saw a lot of the, I would say, like the next generation who were nominated for the administrative professional or the newcomer of the year award. How they were communicating was awesome. They were like walking around with their laptops and headphones on, and they were just constantly on chat to each other all day, but working at the same time. It blew my mind. It was crazy. And I was like, wow. But it seems like, you know, it's, I want to be there to be able to support people through the change that's going to come, because ultimately change will come. And so it's in terms of the profession, what we'll do is, I think the messaging that you said about supporting the next generation is massively important. We can't have a career gap, you know, a skill shortage. We need people to be able to fill these roles that are coming through. In terms of recruitment, it's booming in Birmingham. Literally, like there's so many jobs going. It's fantastic, but not enough people to fill them, and not enough people confident at the moment to move, which is difficult.
I think people are still just very quite jittery with the pandemic having ended, and then, you know, the cost of living, the inflation. We've got a rocky economy for the rest of this year. And I think that part of that, sometimes you think, am I better off just staying here for the meantime? Because there's, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on in the press at the moment with insolvencies and things like that. And like you said, sometimes you think, oh, should I just stay put at the moment? This job's a bit boring, but is it the devil? I know.
Well, I think it's that as well, and it's challenging that, you know, keeping our more experienced members engaged with what's next for them. So not necessarily what's next in their career, but now a lot of them are looking at what can I do to give back. And I think like I hate to use the word, but somebody asked me the other day and said, do you think you'll leave some sort of legacy behind you? And I just like to know, I thought to myself, well, if I can leave knowing that I've done something to make an impact on somebody else's life in some way, which fulfills me, and it's done something that supports them, then that's my work done. That's great. And that's what we'll continue to do. Whatever comes at us with the profession, we'll just try and challenge it and try and tackle it all together head on, I think. So
well, I think you've done an absolutely superb job, obviously having been in the game for so long myself. I understand the challenges, and you know, and although we all love doing it, it can be really, really super exhausting sometimes, take every ounce out of you, but it's always still worth it when you wake up the next morning. And I know, hats off to you for everything you've done. I think you've been absolutely tremendous.
thanks,
what you've achieved so far. So we'd just like to finish the podcast with a couple of things, like who's been your biggest inspiration, like personally and professionally, and secondly, any kind of lessons learned or tips you might want to kind of throw out there to anybody listening.
So I think my biggest inspiration is, I love David Attenborough. I just he's like, I just love him, and I just think to myself, he has the ability to take everyone on a journey with him.
Does.
if you watch a nature program that he did years ago to what it is now, it's so different, but he has such an impact, and he makes his messaging is, I mean, he really makes me think about what we're doing and what impact we're having. And I just think to myself, he's 97 and he's still going, he's still working, and he is still like the program he's just put on at the moment is that he wants to leave, you know, he's still trying to leave a legacy that he's not going to leave this world until people understand that we need to change, and until we change, nothing is going to change. So everyone's making an impact, and I just think to myself, like, fair play, he is truly inspirational. I just think he's fantastic.
I know. Do you know what? My Friday nights now are very, very different from when I was a teen and in my 20s. I'd quite happily sit there with a glass of wine watching David Attenborough on a Friday night. I love him. I totally get it.
Yeah, he's awesome. I just think, you know, my in terms of what I would share is, I just think that it is really important, whatever form of networking that you do, is to network and really get and really build a community. I've, you know, been very lucky. I was taught that if you have even just a few people that are just your solid community, that magical things will happen, and these people will be your biggest supporters, and you will equally support them as much. And that could be people within EPA, it could be people outside of EPA, it could be friends, family, etc. But just having that solid network around you and having that support network is so important. It will bring us up in the times that we really need it, and be there to support each other when we don't. And I would just like to say, Vic, thank you, because when I've had challenges, I've been on the phone to you and like, can you help me with this, Vic, or can you give me some advice on this, and vice versa. And I think that it's really lovely to have that support, and that's what I'm loving about the profession. We're all trying to do everything we can to support each other.
Definitely 100%. Well, you've been an absolute joy this last hour and a half. It's been a fantastic interview, and I'm so pleased with time. No, honestly, some of it, they run as long as they run. That's what a good podcast is to me, and letting people get their story out there. But thank you. You've been absolutely tremendous, and I know a lot of people will be really inspired, not just from a professional but personal sense. It should be. It's a super intriguing and fascinating background. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Vic. Really appreciate it. Hopefully I'll see you soon.
You will. Thank you.
All right, lovely. Thanks.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Assistant Lab. If you enjoyed this content, you know what you need to do. Feel free to share it and help us grow our subscriber base.
Join us again next time, and until then, keep experimenting, innovating, and improving your skill set.